What can you tell us about David Stern and your interactions?
Well, first of all, I agree. The players, it's good to hear. It's more so the veteran guys, the guys who Charles, I think, has been great. Charles Barkley's been great talking about this because, ironically, if I'm not mistaken, Charles and Michael started the same year as David did. Now, David was already working in the league as the chief counsel, so it wasn't like he hadn't been there before. But Charles and veteran players, I'm calling veteran, retired guys, they have perspective because they remember what it was like. Some of the new guys, a lot of the new guys never even saw Michael Jordan play, so we're talking to a different era of player, and they certainly don't have the perspective. I kind of came at it three different ways. When David came on board, I was still coaching in college. I coached in college till '94, and I'm at Seton Hall, close to, in Jersey, close to the NBA offices, and close to, obviously, the Knicks and the Nets. So I was very much aware of what kind of shape the NBA was in at that point, and it wasn't very good. And a lot of people don't remember that. You remember recent history, and that's a long time ago. But the league was hurting. The image was terrible at that point. There was a lot of off-court issues. And there needed to be a lot of changes, and that's when David came on board. And the thing that I believe, and it wasn't Charles, I was listening to somebody I think 2 days ago, talking about David's legacy, and they used the term, they said David was the one who made it more important, the name on the back of the jersey as opposed to the name on the front. And it's true. What David did for players in this league, and David made it, the expression we all use now, ever since it's a players' league and everybody kind of snickers or, it's come to be accepted. David's the one that did that. David made an awful lot of changes. The thing that I think that David had, more so than any other individual, particularly even commissioners, was vision. David saw things sooner than most people saw them, and he saw them clear. And when he wanted to do something and he believed it was in the best interest of the league, he was extremely effective. He was persuasive, is a nice way of putting it. He could also be very demanding, and it didn't matter whether it was with the owners, it's 30 now, I think it was 23 back then, the owners that he worked for, the players, and particularly in conjunction with the Coaches Association, coaches, whatever group it was, the media itself, in negotiating, whether it was ABC or ESPN or TSN or anybody, Turner. David was very, very effective negotiator, and he usually got what he wanted, but the truth was he had this vision that he had was mostly, high percentage. Pick your number, 95, 99% of the time. He knew what was in the best interest of the league, and he demanded it, and he got it. And sometimes he was heavy-handed, and he, forced things upon the players or upon the Players Association or upon coaches or upon owners. But for the most part, and I have no problem saying that because, again, I saw it from the outside. And then in '92, because I was an assistant coach in the Olympics in '92 in the Dream Team, and really David Stern and Dave Gavitt, at that point the commissioner of the Big East, but also chairman of USA Basketball, they were the two that persuaded the league and USA Basketball to let the professionals play again. And what that did, particularly internationally, and you guys have a better feel for that than I do, but that was another step, but a significant step in opening the doors, of the NBA to the rest of the world. And they never looked back since then. David really believed that it needed to be a global game. It needed to be international. And he saw what soccer was like. And he wanted the basketball to be more like that. And it's certainly, ever since then, and certainly since David came on board, it's become so much more a global game and an international game. But the players benefited enormously because David realized players were what it was about. And even all his rule changes and things that he fought for behind the scenes, and he wanted it to be entertainment. He was brilliant in terms of entertainment and making money for the league, for the owners, and for the individual players. And nobody's benefited. I don't think anybody's benefited more than the players have from a lot of the things that David put in place and ushered into the NBA.
With PJ Carlesimo, and I think from that standpoint, it's probably fitting that the last NBA Finals that he was alive for saw a team in Canada win it.
I guarantee you that pleased him enormously,
right.
Enormously, and he was disappointed when Vancouver kind of. I thought a quick decision, but it's not for me to say that. I'm in Seattle. I could speak to Seattle a lot better. I coached here, and I've lived here for 13 years. But Vancouver disappointed me. A week doesn't go by that somebody doesn't say to me, because most people know I live in Seattle, or if it comes out, they'll say, "Boy, I tell you what, we miss Seattle and we miss Vancouver," and they always, they put the two together. But everybody loved Vancouver, and I hope it happens in the future, but I wish we still had a team in Vancouver. That was when I was actually coaching in Portland a good deal of that time. So we were up here in the same chunk. You had Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver all in the league at the same time, and I was sorry to see that go down the way that it did. But David just loved bringing the NBA and the games in France and in England and in China and, the globalization, if you will, of the NBA, the success of NBA play. Somebody asked me before, isn't it kind of ironic now that maybe the two poster guys going forward for the NBA will be Giannis and Luke, and you've got two international guys who arguably, along with, I think, a healthy KD or Steph if they come back, Kawhi certainly, but you've got a couple of international guys that are going to be MVPs. One already has been, and one I think clearly will be in the future, and they may lead their teams to championships going forward.
PJ, you mentioned the alliance with Dave Gavitt, and interestingly enough, part of college when the rules were changing about college players being able to get into the NBA draft earlier, and we watched from interest in the NHL, from my playing years from 82 to 95, because we were poised better to grab that global market. We already had the Swedes and the Finns and the Soviets and the Czechs and the Slovaks. We were way better poised on a world platform to take the global, and yet the alliances he was able to keep across the balance of those alliances allowed the NBA to do it.
And I tell you, people forget now because, now it's accepted and people assume this is the way it was. There was pushback, It was a good time from one standpoint. You had that dream team in 92. Michael and Patrick and Chris Mullin had all been on the 84 Olympic team that won gold in Los Angeles. But David Robinson had been on the 88 team that lost in Korea, didn't win the gold medal in Korea. And then you had guys like John Stockton and Charles Barkley that were very late cuts, if not the last cuts, for some earlier Olympic teams. And a number of these other great players that were on the roster of the Dream Team, just because their graduation time at the time they left college fell in between Olympics, they never got a chance to play. So the players initially accepted it. They really wanted some of them wanted the experience again, some of them wanted it for the first time. But the owners initially were like, well, wait a minute. If you think about it, the makeup of the Olympic team usually includes a lot of the guys that play in May and June on the best teams, the best players on the best teams. So the last thing they wanted was another 6 or 8 weeks of their guys playing basketball, particularly in a real competitive situation against each other and the chance of injury. And, why do we need this? Why are we doing this? And I'll be honest with you, that summer was remarkable. But when we were in San Diego, which is where we practiced for a week, and then we had to qualify, which everybody forgets, in Portland at the Tournament of the Americas. And it really wasn't until we got to Monte Carlo. We practiced in Monte Carlo for a week, and then the 2 weeks in Barcelona. It was mind-boggling. It was like the Beatles. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember when the Beatles came over here, but it was incredible what our players, the recognition, the people that knew them, and what really worldwide superstars they were. And I didn't realize it until we got over there. And David, of course, did. And he knew that, nothing was going to travel the NBA brand like bringing this group, as it turned out that summer, to Barcelona. And that's, behind all the players, the clinics, the coaches going over there, and all the games in the various cities. And I'm sure somewhere in the back of his mind why it was so important for us to be in Toronto and Vancouver. And the NBA's not done expanding. David wanted to go more places, and I think Adam Silver is of the same liking.
Well, that's been a debate for quite some time. Where do you go beyond, crossing the border up to Canada? Can you find a way to get to Europe? Is the technology available for you to pull that off? I'm not sure. Not in the relative future here, but I can speak as a Toronto sports fan. I mean, that's what I'll always remember David Stern as. Predominantly from my standpoint, from a selfish perspective, is he's the guy that brought the NBA up here. And I was born in the early 80s, so I've always taken for granted the Leafs being here, the Jays being here. The Jays got here in 77, so just always been, the Blue Jays have always been here.
Yep.
But the Raptors weren't. And it was a gamble. They're playing out of the Sky Dome. They're playing out of Maple Leaf Gardens.
I remember Damon Stoudemire lighting us up for about 40 points in the Sky Dome a number of times.
Well, remember, too, the 95 draft was at the Dome. I was there. I was up on the 500 level, and everyone was waiting for them to take Ed O'Bannon. They ended up taking Stoudemire, which clearly turned out to be the right pick. And even that, I mean, that didn't have to happen. And all of a sudden, the NBA draft is at a baseball stadium in 95.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing. And again, the word I use, I mean, there's 100 words you could use to describe David, but vision was the one. I mean, he saw things clearer than other people did, and he saw them sooner. I mean, he just saw things before they were about to happen, or he envisioned them happening, and he was ahead of the curve. And he didn't hesitate to use his strength, his influence, his power of persuasion, or, people say he was a dictator and this and that. Was he tough? Yeah, he was very tough. But, working with 23 or eventually 30 owners, a lot of them billionaires, and getting the big market teams to see why they had to take care of the small market teams, and, the limited, but the salary cap to kind of force revenue sharing. All those things, David saw, I think, what was good for the league sooner or more clearly than most people did. And he was really effective in being able to bring about what he thought was good for the league and particularly good for its players.
PJ, if you were going to pick one legacy for him, coming from a sport where it was just the opposite of this, would you say it's the one-name superstar that he allowed for, that he created the platform for?
Yeah, I really do. I think it was the vision he had to put the players up front and to market the players. And it became, he was a marketing genius in terms of, the publicity and everything, but the money that he generated for the league and things like those things were unheard of. Players doing commercials and getting the sponsors on board with putting the players up front in this. And, I think what he's done, clearly it's a league thing, but David realized that the players were the commodity in this league. And every time I hear somebody say it's a players' league, and that's like, it's almost a cliche now. It's just taken for granted, and everybody realizes that. But David, more than anybody, I think brought that about. They say, well, what do you mean? He had Larry Bird, he had Irvin Johnson, he had Michael Jordan. Anybody could have done that. A lot of people would have done well with it, but I always liken it to playing poker. You don't win unless you have good cards, but not everybody does the same thing when they get the good cards. I don't know that anybody else would have done what David Stern did with this league, even with the superstars that he had to work with and he helped to not create, but to focus the world's attention on those guys.